Welcome all, this is Dirt Modeler Video 101. We're going to do a 24 scale dirt late model from start to finish and show everyone how to use some of the dirt modeler parts out there. And I know that a lot of my stuff doesn't have a lot of instructions. Mainly it's because they were invented for me to do full-size replicas myself, and the instructions were just so I could figure them out, and they just kind of ended up I got so many requests for them. I had people asking that I went ahead and put them online, so they could be confusing, and maybe these videos will kind of help with that. So we're going to build one from start to finish, and we're going to start with some of the stuff that we'll need to make that happen. And we're going to start with this metal plate here. I believe this is an 18 gauge steel plate, and it's got to be steel. Stainless steel would be fine, but this is just regular old steel. You can get them at your Lowe's. Most of the stuff you can get from Lowe's. So anyway, it used to be nice and shiny, but I've used it so much that it is now dull, but it still works just fine. So these guys here, these are neomolybdenum magnets, and I got them from KJ Magnetics. And I'll put a link in the comments to where you can actually pick these up if you don't already know. They are pound for pound probably the strongest magnets you've ever messed with, and that's important because they're going to come in handy. Their strength. The ones that I have are they are 1/2 inch square and 1/4 inch thick, and they have 12.5 pounds of force. Which is quite a lot for such a little thing. You can get bigger ones that are even stronger if you want. So the next thing up is aluminum L channel. It is 16th inch thick, and it's important that it is aluminum because we do not want the magnets to affect them at all. We just want to use them to keep things straight, and non-ferrous metals are not affected by magnets. Well, unless the magnetic field is super strong, but we're not going to get too technical here. For our purposes, the magnets don't affect them, so that's all that really matters. So I just use a bandsaw to cut them into various lengths. They just come in handy. We'll actually use them quite a lot in the build process, so make sure and have a little supply. So the next thing up we want to talk about is the actual soldering iron. This is a Weller. I think it's a 105 is the model number on it. It cost me about $40, and I've had it for quite a long time. It has soldered a lot of joints, and I'm actually on the second iron. The base has been fine, but I burnt one of the irons out, and the replacement cost me about $12. So I actually got two of them, so I have one in storage for if it should happen again. I have a couple different tips. The one on the top there is a screwdriver tip, and the one on the bottom is a pencil tip. And you want both because it really depends on how much heat you want in your joint. And as far as adjustments goes, I usually keep mine on 4 or 5. I usually haven't needed to get it any lower than that. So the next thing we want is obviously solder. There are 3 types here. I use a lot of caster solders. They're usually, I can only get them online. There's nowhere in my area to get them. This one here is rosin core, which seems redundant because we're using acid flux as well, but I like it to melt really fast. This one here is my medium, quote unquote medium solder. It's a little bit stronger, takes a little bit more for it to melt, but it holds better. And the super solder here is silver bearing solder. It holds the strongest, but needs the most heat for it to actually melt, and you will need a torch for it to actually work. And I think it's Alpha Metals. The acid flux is what makes it all possible, and I love this stuff. I use these portion cups, which I got from a grocery outlet store or a food service store. I get them by the sleeve. And you want to throw away paintbrush because you're actually going to apply the solder to your joint before you actually do any soldering. So I really recommend getting an old paintbrush and using it just for that purpose, because you're going to use the heck out of it. So when you want to up the ante, next thing up is an actual blowtorch, butane torch. This one here, I spent a fair amount on it because I wanted to actually start really easily. I don't want to have to waste my time with it, and so this one has electric start, and I haven't actually used it in a while, so it took a couple pulls before it actually fired up, and then I remember, wait a second, I gotta actually turn the gas on. But we are going to, when we're actually doing the main chassis rails, we're going to use the torch quite a bit, because the rails are pretty big and they take a lot of heat. So these guys here, these clamps, they're cheap, and they're really handy. I think I got these at Harbor Freight, I believe. I've had them forever. That yellow one obviously has seen some work in its days. And binder clips can work as well. They're not as handy though, really. But we're going to use them to hold parts to that aluminum channel. And so the tips will actually get burn off from the torch, so I recommend just pulling the little green tip there off the clamps. And the other thing is some little alligator clips. They're useful to hold things, but also as a heat sink, and we'll show why that's important later on when you want to suck heat away from a joint and you don't want other things to melt when you're trying to solder onto something. So I do sell these. You can get these in various different places, but I bought a bunch of them and just kind of sell them in smaller quantities so people don't have to buy a ton of them like I did. So the next thing up is helping hands, and these are great too, because part of the whole soldering thing is you want the part to be exactly where you want it before you even start soldering it. All you want to do is drop solder on the joint, and helping hands are part of it. Next thing up is these hemostats, and they are along the same lines. They are part of just holding things still. They're like little micro vices, and they come in handy quite a bit. And these tweezers as well. These are spring-loaded, so they will hold parts all by themselves, and like to have a couple pairs on hand at least. And holding photo etches, nice and easy. Although you don't usually want to hold a photo etch like this, but just to give you an example of how they hold. So there you have it. There is a basic starting kit for soldering. You obviously don't need all of this stuff. You don't need this specific stuff. Whatever is available in your area will get you started. I wanted to keep this video simple and actually get it published rather than mess with it, because I'm still getting used to all the equipment and editing video and all that stuff. So we'll get more complicated along the way. The next video we'll put out will be actually printing the plans and how to get it set up and actually start cutting the bars and soldering. So stick around. DM102 is coming up next. We'll see you then. Until next time, Dirt Modeler.